If you're listening to this, it's Boxing Day. It's a day after Christmas. And guys, it's another episode of Locked On Women's Basketball that starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Guys, today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. I feel like a lot of people might have gotten a little gift from Game Time this holiday season. I feel like it's a great gift. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, guys, thank you again for tuning in. I'm here with such a special guest. I've actually been meaning to get Madeline on the show for so long. It's Madeline Kenney, currently at the New York Post, but she spent time in Detroit, in Golden State, Chicago. She could talk everything sports, but she's focused on women's sports at the Post. Madeline, thank you so much for coming on Locked On Women's Basketball.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
So happy to have you. This whole episode basically is going to be a recap of 2024 in women's sports. So there's no one better than you to come on. And we're going to break it down like this. So first segment, everybody, is going to be all NCAA women's. It's the talk of the town right now. We're coming off some amazing games and an amazing year. So we're going to talk through that in this first segment. Stay tuned for the second segment, though, because we're going to talk about WNBA. And that means WNBA offseason, draft expansion, and a new league you might have heard of called Unrivaled. And a little bit about something that happened back in August, the Olympics. And then finally, in the third segment, we're going to recap other big moments in women's sports this year, particularly focus on women's basketball. So it's going to be a great episode. Maddie, thank you again. I just am like still processing this UConn USC game. I love what you wrote about it. I feel like you've really tied in the suspense and just how crazy of a game it was. So I kind of want to start a little bit with that and just talk about these two teams. Like we're coming off a gift of what a great game that was.
Yeah, and I mean, like, what a big moment in general for women's sports to have, you know, two of the biggest stars in college basketball, period, not like men's or women's. It's college basketball, like, all together, going head to head in a matchup that was aired on primetime after the Fox NFL postgame show. So, I mean, it just had like the makings to be an electric night. And that's exactly what it was. So early on, it was like all JuJu. JuJu Watkins was just killing it. She was cooking. She hit a few threes over Paige Bueckers, and you're thinking like, oh gosh. And like there was a moment in the second quarter, I remember, because we were sitting kind of courtside a few rows back, and you could just kind of see the frustration Paige was having on her face of, you know, it wasn't really working for her, and she was kind of getting beat in a lot of different ways. And it was like, okay, something has to happen in this second half, because USC had like a double-digit lead heading into halftime, and Connecticut just didn't have a pulse, it seemed like. And then in third quarter, you know, the script flipped, right? And Paige is leading this charge with Sarah Strong for Connecticut to come back. And that fourth quarter, it was so imbalanced. You didn't know at the end who was going to win. And you have, you know, there were two opportunities within like the last minute where JuJu Watkins is taking free throws, and she's facing the UConn student section that was so rowdy. And I don't know how she managed to focus, because I personally would not have been able to keep my composure in a moment like that. But, you know, she made 3 of her 4 free throws on 2 trips, and that kind of was what sealed the win in the end. And, you know, there's always heartbreak, really difficult situations. Sarah Strong was sent to the free throw line for 3 free throws that would have tied the game if she made all 3, and she missed the second one. But, you know, I think, and Lindsay, the USC coach, said this after the game, Sarah Strong has such a bright future that she's going to be making more of those like game-winning baskets down the wire than, you know, what happened last night.
I love that shout out too, because it's like Paige mentioned it, she's like, this is not coming down to just one shot. That's the beauty of teams. Yeah.
That's the biggest misconception. Like, it was like UConn didn't have anything going for it in the first half. So to say like, it came down to those free throws, I mean, like, it did, but it didn't. There was a lot more that could have been done.
Yeah. And so I'm so curious, as someone who was there, some people are saying that the vibe with UConn, where a lot of people coming into the season, Paige is projected to go number 1 in the W. So they're kind of saying UConn's going to finish number 1 unless it's South Carolina. But we also can't forget about USC and so many other teams. About UConn specifically, did it kind of seem like Coach Gino is playing around with things and kind of playing the long game of the season where he has to find out which lineup works for him and how subbing in and kind of coaching and going through the details of how long he's going to keep certain players on the court? Did it seem like he's still working that out, or are they just really not good enough to beat USC?
No, I think there was some of that. And then obviously Fudd, she's coming back from having a tweak with her knee that she had surgery on last year. So I think there was some hesitancy to let her play for long sprints. I mean, look, when you have Fudd, Paige, Sarah Strong all on the court, that is a dynamic trio that is going to be hard to stop. And at the end of the day, regular season, does it matter? Yeah, of course, to a degree. But all that matters in the end is the NCAA tournament. And so I think Gino's focus is, yes, on making sure that people are getting enough reps and getting enough playing time and tinkering with the lineups to see who plays well with who. But I think it's also just making sure and I know load management's a word that gets thrown around, but just making sure players are healthy and at their best come the postseason, because that's when people really make their legacy.
I love that. I love that read. Let's play a long game and look ahead. Another player that comes to mind about this season is Hannah Hidalgo. And I know you wrote about her a little bit too. Watching her play, it's like, it's so exciting to watch. She has so much energy. So can you just talk a little bit about what you've seen out of her this season?
Yeah, I mean, when Olivia Miles was coming back from injury, there was kind of this, how is the dynamic of Notre Dame's backcourt going to look like with them two playing together? But Olivia's return has really allowed Hannah to shine as a scorer and has allowed her to play off the ball more, make more cuts, make more movements off the ball, which have really opened up the offense for Notre Dame. I think like the stats are obviously otherworldly. They're so flashy, but it's also like when you look at what she does when she doesn't have the ball in her hand. And that is like kind of the full picture of it. And then also defensively, what she brings to the table. She's such a scrappy defender. Just her ability to disrupt passing lanes and frustrate opponents. I mean, she had in that Connecticut game, I think it was last week now, she had a few plays where you're just like, man, like she is a dog. And also like when it came to her scoring, you're like heat check, and then she makes it and you're like, wow, like she's on another level. And so I think, that backcourt duo between Hannah and Olivia Miles, I'm just going to say it, most dynamic, most exciting backcourt in basketball this season. And I think that they have a really special, they can do a lot. It's going to be interesting because obviously they have 2 losses that you feel like they should have won, considering they beat USC and UConn because they lost to Utah and TCU. But, I think sometimes those losses, you learn a lot of lessons in them and it'll benefit them down the road.
Okay. All right. I'm feeling that. They're so fun to watch. Coach Neil Ivey did a great job. And a final team I just kind of want to recap with you is a team that spent some time in the number 1 spot, and that's UCLA. Like the Bruins are pushing for a championship this year. Out of them, TCU, Iowa, even South Carolina, like what of those teams surprise you? I know you talked a little bit about the Blue Buds of women's college basketball, but do any of those teams stand out to you as okay, this is a team I have to follow the entire season closely because they might win it all?
I mean, just speaking from a bigger picture, I feel like the parity in women's basketball is so prevalent this season. And in past years, you had your UConn, you had South Carolina, sometimes like the second or third team would flip flop between Notre Dame or Stanford or whatever. Like you had this upper tier and then you had everybody else. And this season, it seems like the divide between that upper echelon of college women's basketball and everyone else is a lot smaller. Like there's just so much parity. You have to keep track of it because there's teams like Richmond that I could see being like a Cinderella story, you know, when it come March. And obviously that's looking really far ahead. But I'm really intrigued with UCLA and just seeing what they're able to do. I mean, that South Carolina win was so huge for them. It was so huge for the program, probably the biggest win in program history for them. And I think that they have a lot of good pieces, and they're a team that's going to more likely than not make noise come March.
We have so much to look forward to, and I'm so excited to talk to you a little bit more about this past NCAA women's season and some professional women's hoops too. So more after this. We're going to take a little break and then come right back to it with Maddie Kenney. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time, friend of the pod. We got to shout them out. And like I said, this is the season to go to live events if you can. And there's no better way to do that than through the Game Time app. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There's the super deal. There's priority, which is like Game Time Picks. It is such a good thing. And the curation of it all makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater. It doesn't even just have to be sports. There's so many live events to go to. I also love the seat view. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app. What time is it? It's game time. We also want to shout out Rocket Money. Did you know that Rocket Money can help you find subscriptions you forgot about or you are paying for twice? That happens to be like way too often. I had a subscription that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everyone together in one place, where it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I need this. I'm telling you guys, I actually need this. I've used it to cancel services that I wasn't using anymore, and I already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, and it's a good time for goals, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing out about budgeting every month. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Hope you know it by now. Okay, Maddie, we're back, and we kind of talked about all women's hoops this season, and I just want to take our listeners back to the beginning of the year. It's like the time for reflection and everything. I remember being at the Final Four, and I'm like, I don't know what team is going to win this. I'm pretty sure South Carolina, because they were undefeated, but I didn't know. And you talked about how this year there's even more parity. What are the key differences? What's missing this season that was there last season, if at all? And then I'll ask you that in reverse too, about what's different about the season in addition. But yeah, is there anything missing this season that was there last year?
I mean, the most obvious one is Caitlin Clark. Like, I mean, there are other stars that have obviously risen to the occasion this season, and people that were, you know, up in that star tier with her, like Paige and JuJu, obviously. But you know what Caitlin Clark has done for the game, in addition to a lot of other players, and you know, Angel Reese gets thrown into that conversation. I even think about the women that were in the early ages of the WNBA, Cheryl Swoops, Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, all of those, you know, Lindsay Whalen, like the list goes on and on. There's a lot. It wasn't just Caitlin Clark, but I think this era of social media and what she was doing, she shoots a lot of threes. It's kind of reminiscent in some ways of Steph Curry. It's a lot of the modern game. And so I think that's kind of what makes her so exciting and so electric. And, obviously that's the biggest difference is she's not here this season. But, she obviously plays in the WNBA now, so she's not gone for long.
Yeah. And you spent time covering Steph Curry directly. Like the way he can light up arena. I love that you compare that to Caitlin Clark, because it's like so many people are tuning in to watch this confidence to shoot up from like 40 feet out. Do you feel like the crowd responds similarly to Caitlin like they do to Steph? Yeah.
I mean, it's still a little early to compare them like apple to apple, but I think when covering the Warriors, I mean, there's always fans lining up around the team hotel for autographs. There's the amount of people that show up an hour plus before the game as soon as the gates open just to watch him warm up, just to try to get an autograph, just to try to get him to give him like a high five or fist bump. And Steph is one of those NBA players that takes a lot of time pregame to interact with fans, which is really cool. And I see a lot of similarities with Caitlin right now in the sense, that obviously a lot of WNBA teams, when the Fever were coming to town, they went to bigger venues to, supply the demand for tickets. And so I kind of, you're seeing that growing following that she has. So I think there are some similarities, but also Steph has won. Caitlin hasn't won yet. So.
Yeah, we got to see how the championships match out. And mentioning the greats of women's basketball, like that was another thing that I remember from this year. And I'm like, come on, just like Caitlin, like literally just like Caitlin be Caitlin. Like I want everyone to like just enjoy Caitlin, but know that there were so many people that came before her. And I feel like earlier this year, there was kind of crazy conversations where people are like, oh, Cheryl Swoops, blah, blah, it doesn't matter. But I feel like the beauty of the Caitlin Clark story is it's like, all right, we're going to talk about her and let her do her thing. But then like, you have to talk about all these other people that come with her. And I think it's kind of cool that we're pushing that story forward, the current players in the W and the ones past.
Yeah, there's so many untold or undertold stories within the WNBA of current and former players. And there's just so much like relatability or uniqueness of the paths that people have taken to get to where they are. And so, that's something like in my role, I really want to get into this year. Like obviously Caitlin is a storyline that will be continued to be followed for years to come. But, there's plenty of other players. And I think that's the other thing too, is that Caitlin might have introduced somebody to the WNBA or to women's basketball in general with her game. But now it's about like spreading the love. And I don't put that solely on Caitlin Clark's shoulders, because I think that, some of the discussions that were being had this season were a little out of tune because, Caitlin isn't necessarily demanding for all this attention and stuff like that. But I think that, my hope is that it'll continue to grow.
And you're doing that. You're at the helm. I think it's so incredible that you have that. And that's something we try to do here too, where it's like, all right, I'm gonna have to post about Caitlin on our social media, or we're going to talk about her on a podcast, but that's one time out of 10. Like every other time, like there's so many other stories. So it's like, oh, look at this. But then we also have gotcha. Like we got this right here too. Yeah. And so with Caitlin and that conversation, with the Times Person of the Year, Times Athlete of the Year, she has these awards, but I feel like it kind of worked where it's like those people who were brought in just because of Caitlin, some of them are staying and consuming women's sports content in general. It doesn't have to just be women's basketball. And have you found that with the engagement you're getting at the Post as well?
Yeah. And it's not always like, it's not just women's basketball that's seeing a boom. It's women's soccer, it's women's hockey with the PWHL. Like there's a lot of, growing up, there wasn't a lot of access for for me, I grew up in Nebraska. Like there wasn't a lot of access to like professional women sports leagues or athletes that like I could see myself in, or and so I think that that's like the really cool thing about this movement, and just the effort that networks and and the leagues and players and all of the people that are involved, like all the stakeholders, and trying to make these types of stories more accessible. Like it makes a huge difference.
I'm so happy you brought up Nebraska, because we're going to talk about that later a little bit, like about volleyball. We do have to take a little bit. I know. Amazing season. It had to come to an end.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to talk about that. More moments from 2024. We didn't even touch on Unrivaled yet, but we'll get more to it. Guys, one final segment. I can't believe it. Coming up right now, actually. All right. We want to shout out Robin Hood today. There's so many resources out there, but Robinhood just stands out as one of the most reliable ones I could think of. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product specific for product specific disclosures, visit robinhoodgold.com. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. Okay. We got that out the way. Maddie, I know we mentioned it a little bit, but Nebraska volleyball loses. And we don't really have to talk about the laws. We could talk about Penn State, but like Nebraska volleyball and Nebraska women's sports in general, I'm like, there's so many eyes on this sport. So like, we talk about even you growing up in Nebraska, but yeah, you were like, oh my God, we can't talk about it. But with Nebraska volleyball, what stands out to you about the impact that they've had on the women's sports landscape this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Nebraska women's volleyball can be compared to Connecticut's women's basketball in a lot of ways. Like they just have had years of just consistency and like bringing in the best players in the nation to play at Nebraska, and they're consistently in the Final Four. They've won several championships. You know what that program has become, you know, since the early 2000s is really impressive. And I think that you're seeing that like love be spread to other like women's sports within Nebraska to like continue to build that type of fandom. Because I think like Nebraska, if I'm not mistaken, they hold the record for most fans at a game. They had a game outside, you know, in Royal Stadium. Yeah, it was insane. But even like I think the draw between Creighton and Nebraska when they played, I want to say was like a record-setting crowd too. I mean, they've not that much. It was just in an arena, but I'm saying that like they've really built up this love for it. And I have, you know, younger cousins that have gotten into volleyball because of being able to go to those games and see those women do what they do.
That's the standout thing about Nebraska and about women's sports this year. I love that we could talk about that. And the final thing, I can't believe we only have a minute for this, but unrivaled women's basketball. And I mean, I guess we could talk about the Olympics too, but just like basketball has grown, it's continuing to grow. And for you, was this like, oh, this was a great year for women's sports and it's probably won't get better? Or is this kind of just the beginning from the success we saw at the Olympics and looking ahead to things like Unrivaled happening in the W off season?
I mean, I started covering the WNBA in 2019. So I have seen it was this gradual increase, and the pandemic kind of the bubble season hurt some of that momentum to a degree. Just because everyone was dealing with their own personal stuff, right? Like as humans. But we have continued to see that rise, and it's really shot up, you know, in the last few years, the interest. And so as long as, you know, the momentum, they continue to build off that momentum. I mean, that comes down to teams. It comes down to front office personnel, players, league officials, reporters, media. Like there's a lot of stakeholders involved in it. And I think the future is really bright, and I think it's only going to become more and more mainstream.
and you're pushing it out to the masses. Maddie, where can people find your work? We have your Instagram link there. And what do you have coming up? We'll shout you out.
Yeah, I'm going to do a year in review for women's sports this year, and I'll have a little column on that. And I'll probably have a Sarah Strong story coming in the next few days or so, and just a lot of other good stuff. And if you want to follow my stuff, it's on the New York Post website, or my Twitter is the same as my Instagram handle, and so is my Blue Sky, or X, not Twitter, sorry.
I can't get to X yet. I have to keep talking. Yeah, everybody check out. It's at Mad Kenney, Kenney EY. This was such a pleasure. I can't wait to read your column. I'm so excited for all the work you have to come at the Post, and congrats again on that. And thank you for coming on. This is a great time. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.